At Augusta. Louise Galvin, you're back. How are things?
I am. Apologies.
Not at all. So we were just setting the scene there for the start of Ireland's Six Nations campaign anyway this weekend. This is 6 months without a competitive fixture, 12 months with having only one test match, Louise. Do we know what sort of shape they're in or how things have been going and how they might actually come into this year's Six Nations?
Yeah, it's pretty difficult for the girls. Like, the sound bites coming out of camp have been just that lack of competitive matches. And I suppose as well, it's the fact that it's consistently been postponed. The girls have been expecting that they were going to be playing as the end of the Six Nations come October, and they just got that Italy game, which if you were injured or, out of form, you missed out on that game. You didn't think it was going to be another 7 months before there'd be another test match. Obviously, before then, there was meant to be World Cup qualifiers in December, then Six Nations, then World Cup qualifiers again were meant to be this month, I believe, and it all got postponed again. So it's been a very long wait. But what it has allowed for Adam Griggs and his squad is they've gotten a huge amount of work under their belts. Like, this is one of the best prepared Irish teams that has ever gone into the Six Nations and won in, from one point of view, because they've had about 20 consecutive camps together. Now, at the same time, that doesn't replace match intensity, and you have to remember these girls are not playing club matches either. There's a handful that are playing over in the English Premiership that are getting a few games, but you're talking about, you could count it probably on one hand. So although they have a huge amount of preparation done and amount of time together, and they've had serious amount of camps to work on the clarity around their defensive systems and how they want to play and attack, they haven't had that match practice or that match intensity. And another thing that kind of presents as a bit of a difficulty then for Adam Griggs is, he's 3 matches here back to back. He really needs to hit the ground running with what he believes to be his best 15 or his best 23, so that they can get any amount of consistency. It's not really that he can rotate week in, week out, because he just doesn't know when the next batch of games is going to happen again.
Aoife McDermott touched on that during the week. Actually, she said that the gap in games actually motivates her. She says, "I'm so excited. I really believe we've improved a huge amount over the last 12 months, albeit not having played a game. I think we're in one of the best places we've ever been, and I think we can go out and cause upsets this tournament." And she also said that Ireland are fitter, stronger, faster than ever. And you kind of have to take her word for it that behind the scenes, even though we haven't had any way of judging things publicly, behind the scenes things look like they've been going pretty well.
Yeah, and Aoife is one of those players as well that would have missed the Italy game through injury. She had a fractured bone in her foot. So for her, it's pretty much over a year since she's played. But the soundbites from the girls got into camp has been that it's a very happy, close-knit group. I think every setback that they've had in terms of matches being postponed and that unknowing nature of when the World Cup is going to be, I think that it sounds like they've really knitted and gelled together as a group, and they're not kind of bitching and moaning. They're just getting on with it. Okay, new focus. That's an opportunity for us to get more miles on the clock in terms of training camps. They have a real talismanic leader in Ciara Griffin as well, junior. She's just an excellent person on and off the field, and you can be sure she's constantly keeping them focused on that the goal is to consistently improve at each training session with each training camp, so that when whoever does get to take the field and take those 1 to 23 jerseys, that they'll be as well prepared as they possibly can be, and to make the most of the opportunity of actual games. I think it's only when games are taken away from you realise how much enjoyment you get out of them.
Yeah, I can imagine. When you look through the squad then, Louise, there are 5 uncapped players. It's interesting that they've all represented Ireland at sevens level. So what is the story here with the relationship between the 15s team and the sevens team? Is the sevens turning into a bit of a pathway rather than a destination, as it was seen to be the case in some scenarios over the last couple of years?
Yeah, I suppose, when sevens was set up initially, they were kind of set up separately and then brought back together. But the sevens calendar has been so busy that it's been increasingly difficult, and I know myself from when I was playing sevens and trying to transition over across the 15s game at times, it's increasingly difficult because you're playing a World Series that pretty much goes on for 9-10 months of the year, and then you've European Championships, and every second year you've now World Cup or Olympic qualifiers. So when sevens players are coming across, and just the girls that are there now, like there's no undoubting their skill, their speed, their technical ability, their fitness, but you do need exposure at the 15th game, whether it be at club or before you go into international duty, and that's what's been lacking. So often these, brilliant players are being transferred across, but they haven't had the opportunity to bed into the systems, to bed into that squad, and then obviously, even though you could have 2 or 3 very good players coming in, if players don't know calls initially because they're coming in a camp before or 2 camps before a match, it can upset the players that are there, and it can, sometimes it can be more harm than good. And I think over the years we haven't necessarily fully got it right. But this year, because the sevens international calendar has been completely wiped, I suppose the nature of sevens is you're trying to play so many games in one destination, and everyone's in a hotel. It just hasn't been feasible to get it up and running. There was a tournament in Dubai last week, but again, not of the teams aren't going to these tournaments because they have to quarantine and return to their own country. So what that has allowed Ireland to do, it's allowed them to actually immerse some of those sevens girls straight into the 15 squad, and they've been in it since before Christmas. So rather than just getting 2 or 3 camps and trying to rely on skill and ability alone, they're actually proper immersed in the systems and giving themselves a right good crack at earning a spot within the squad. And it's definitely going to benefit both sets of players, because for the sevens girls that are in, well, they're not playing international rugby either at the moment. And for the 15s girls, well, they're seeing them there week in, week out, and seeing the hard work they're putting in, and they're only going to add to the squad in terms of their skill and their speed and technical ability. So for the moment, this is actually quite a good marriage of the two, and it was a good opportunity that Adam Griggs and Anthony Eddy took to kind of blend the squads. But going forward, if we go back to, I suppose, how the tournaments, or how the fact that the 7 squads are contracted, they are semi-professional, professional for, I suppose, depending on what way you look at it in terms of funding, and their 7s is generally their priority, so it's hard to fully immerse them into the 15s environment for Six Nations periods, for example.
If we look at a couple of those players then, those 5 uncapped players I mentioned that came over from 7s essentially, one of them was earmarked by Ciara Griffin as someone who is going to tear it up in this year's Six Nations campaign. It is Louise Murphy Crowe. How good is she, and is she going to tear it up this campaign?
Oh, listen, I could talk to you for 10, 15 minutes about Amy on her own. She's just an incredible athlete. She's the fastest player in the country, bar none. She has an incredibly hard work ethic, and she's a really, really smart girl, and just a really good person to have in her team. So in 7, she's known for her speed, but to be honest, someone who's played with her for the last 6 years since I joined the 7 squad, she's so much more than that, and I'm really excited to see her get her opportunity. She hasn't played 15s in years, so again, having these camps back to back would have been hugely advantageous to her. I really hope we see over the next few weekends. Again, it's tough on Adam Griggs, because I suppose when 7s gets back up and running again, he's not quite sure when he'll have a lot of these players, so it's probably a bit of a balancing act about getting use out of them. But I suppose this year, if the World Cup was being played, he probably would have had them until New Zealand, until the World Cup. But the fact the World Cup's pushed out another year, it kind of adds a bit more uncertainty about how much he would have the 7 players next year. That adds, do you work with players that you're guaranteed to have then? But Amy Lee is such a precocious talent, and I really hope she gets her opportunity, because I'd back her in that back line 100%. And just even some of the girls, besides the 5 uncapped players, like Hannah Tyrrell would have retired from 7s last year and would be focusing on 15s now. Katie Fitzhenry, Dorothy Wall, they're some of the players who would have transitioned across in the last 2 or 3 years, and that have done that transition well. So it's good, because for the women's game, there's been a lot of investment to these players at 7s level to get the benefit out of them. For 15s level as well, it's massive, it's huge.
It's a pretty exciting backline then when you talk about Amy Lee in such glowing terms, and I think everybody's excited to see Bevan Parsons play at every given opportunity at this point as well. Like, how excited should we be to see her grow further into the international game? Like, I mean, she she's already looked like an absolutely fully finished international player at this point, but there's probably still a lot of development yet to come and still a lot of improvement, and also a Six Nations that is going to be played on harder ground this year than pretty much every other year it'll happen.
Yeah, I mean, Bevan, she's just a superstar already. I think, from a physical point of view, she was pretty much almost developed as a 16, 17-year-old coming into the programme. So now what she's adding to the game is that match awareness and that decision-making. And I know she's a really competitive individual as well, and someone that has also transitioned back over into the Sevens programme. I actually played with her in a Sevens tournament down in Sydney 2 or 3 years ago. When I'm not sure she was leaving third year or fifth year, but it's incredible to see the talent that she has. It's really, really exciting. So, I mean, if there was going to be a stage of the Six Nations that we see Amy Lee on one wing and Bevan on the other wing, well, listen, chuck love, get our gain line and get that ball out wide, because magic's going to happen.
Yeah, it's a fairly exciting prospect, to say the least. Just on this weekend then, finally, Louise, they're up against Wales. You've got Sophie Spence actually in the Welsh backroom team at the moment. They lost all 4 of their Six Nations matches they played last year, conceding an average of more than 40 points a game. And as I mentioned, they got hammered last weekend as well. So Ireland, are they expected to win this weekend?
Look, Ireland are expected to win, and I think within the camp, even with what Aoife was saying, you mentioned her comments earlier, I think the girls will come out and say they're hoping to win every game that they're going to play. Wales are someone that have given us a lot of difficulty over the years, but we'll certainly be putting our hopes on getting a fairly decent victory over in Wales. Now, they'll come into the game against us with a lot more belief than they travel to France with. So, I don't expect it to be a 50 or even a 40-point drubbing, necessarily. I think for our girls, what the difference will be is Wales have a game under their belt now, whereas we don't, and we've had that kind of pent-up almost excitement of having trained for so long and so hard, and players wanting to just put their best foot forward, that sometimes that can make the first 20 minutes of the game so a little bit edgy and, maybe unforced errors due to just that lack of kind of match intensity and match exposure in the last while. So it could be a little bit scrappy initially, but I expect our girls to do well and to manage the game well and come away with a 20-plus point victory at the end of it, that they can bring to the last game or the second game, I should say, against France when they come to Dublin. So certainly an Irish win, but I think, don't be surprised if you see it's a little bit ropey at the beginning just due to the lack of match practice. And again, for people tuning in, the girls aren't just playing their first international match. A lot of them are playing their first Rugby 15s match in a very long time, as the AIL was completely cancelled. So, just don't judge them in the first 15, 20 minutes, judge them on the 80 minutes, and then at the end of the whole Six Nations, we'll see how they get on.
Louise Galvin, great stuff. Thanks a million.
Thanks, guys.